He walked quietly into the contest hall, a dignified veteran in a simple jacket. When the arrogant former NASA mathematician forced him to solve an impossible equation, everyone exchanged smirks. They were about to witness mathematical history, and the most satisfying comeuppance this competition had ever seen. The community center at Veterans Park buzzed with anticipation as the annual mathematics challenge was about to begin. Folding chairs arranged in neat rows filled with competitors, mostly young tech professionals and college students eager to test their skills. Dr. Richard Harrington made his way to the judging table, his presence commanding immediate attention. Distinguished mathematician, former NASA researcher, and notorious for his disdain toward anyone he deemed intellectually inferior. His silver hair and tailored navy suit projected authority as his piercing eyes scanned the room. Jack Thompson slipped into a back seat, smoothing his worn but immaculate veteran's jacket. At 72, with white hair and weathered hands, he stood out among the young competitors. The slight limp from an old service injury and his military-straight posture marked him as different. He wasn't there to blend in. He was there to learn. Today's challenge will address Riemann's hypothesis and its applications in cryptography, Harrington announced, his voice silencing the room instantly. His gaze landed briefly on Jack, mouth twitching with subtle disapproval. Jack had seen that look before. The quick assessment, the dismissal, the same look he'd received when he'd applied for the local library position 5 years ago. "We need someone who can relate to younger patrons," they'd said, before reluctantly hiring him for the maintenance and shelving position instead of the mathematical reference desk he'd hoped for. The competition began with presentations from previous winners. Jack took meticulous notes, his eyes lighting up during discussions of number theory. When questions were invited, his hand remained down. Experience had taught him that people like him weren't expected to speak in rooms like this. During the break, Jack overheard two young competitors whispering nearby. "Who's the old guy taking notes?" one snickered. "Probably some retired high school teacher trying to keep his mind active." The other replied dismissively, "Harrington hates when non-specialists attend these things." Jack gripped his notebook tighter, but maintained his composed expression. They didn't know that mathematics had been his companion throughout his military career, that he'd been part of Air Force Special Reconnaissance, working with encryption algorithms during the Cold War. They couldn't see the equations that danced in his mind when he closed his eyes at night, still solving problems decades after his service ended. As the competition resumed, Dr. Harrington presented his approach to an unsolved mathematical problem. His explanation was elegant but contained a subtle flaw in the encryption application. One Jack immediately recognized. He'd encountered similar issues during his classified work decades ago. "Any questions?" Harrington asked, his tone suggesting he expected none worth answering. The room remained silent until Jack, almost involuntarily, raised his hand. The moment his arm went up, he regretted it. Every head turned. Harrington's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "Yes, sir," he said, deliberate condescension coding his words. "I was wondering about the variable transformation in step 4, Jack said, his voice steady despite his discomfort. "Wouldn't that create vulnerabilities when applied to encrypted communications?" The room went silent. Several participants exchanged glances. Harrington's expression hardened. "Your name?" he demanded. "Jack Thompson." "And your mathematical background?" Jack hesitated. "I work at the public library." A ripple of whispers spread through the audience. Harrington's face shifted from surprise to amusement. "The library," he repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "How interesting. And you believe you found an error in my work?" Jack's face remained calm, military training kicking in. Not an error exactly, just a potential security implication that perhaps... Harrington interrupted. "Instead of questioning established cryptographic principles, perhaps you should focus on more accessible pursuits." Several participants laughed. Jack felt the sting, but maintained his dignified composure, regretting his decision to speak up. Harrington wasn't done. Having found an easy target, he seemed determined to make an example of Jack. "Since our guest in the library has such confidence in mathematical theory," he said, straightening his tie with deliberate slowness, "perhaps he'd like to demonstrate his expertise." He gestured toward the electronic whiteboard at the front. "Come forward, Mr. Thompson." Jack froze. Every instinct told him to decline, to escape. But something deeper, pride perhaps, or the exhaustion of being underestimated, pushed him to his feet. The walk to the front of the hall felt endless. Each slightly limping step echoed against the floor as whispers followed his path. He took the electronic marker from Harrington's outstretched hand, conscious of how his own hand, strong but lined with age, contrasted with the mathematician's manicured fingers. "Let's make this accessible," Harrington said loudly enough for everyone to hear. The word accessible dripped with condescension. He turned to the board and typed a complex differential equation. Jack recognized it immediately, a problem from advanced multivariate calculus. Difficult, but certainly not impossible for someone with proper training. The challenge wasn't the equation itself, but in the public humiliation intended. "Take your time," Harrington said with false generosity. "We're all eager to learn from diverse perspectives." More laughter rippled through the audience. Jack felt his hand trembling slightly as he stared at the board. Behind him, someone whispered, "This is painful to watch." Dr. Elizabeth Chun, a visiting professor from MIT seated in the front row, frowned at Harrington's display but remained silent, watching Jack with curious interest. Jack took a deep breath. The numbers and symbols on the screen began to arrange themselves in his mind, falling into patterns he'd recognized since his days at the Air Force Academy. Patterns that saved lives when he broke an enemy codes during his service. He raised a marker and made his first mark. "Perhaps we should simplify," Harrington began, but stopped when he saw Jack confidently writing. The room grew quiet as he worked methodically through the problem. His initial nervousness faded as he lost himself in the elegant dance of mathematics. He wasn't in a judgmental competition hall anymore. He was in his own mind, where numbers had always made perfect sense. After 2 minutes of absolute silence, Jack finished the final step, placed the marker down, and stepped back. Harrington stared at the board, his expression shifting from smugness to confusion. He scanned the work, looking for mistakes, but found none. The solution was not only correct, but executed with surprising elegance. "That's correct," he admitted reluctantly. Though anyone with basic calculus training could have managed it. Dr. Chen's eyebrows raised slightly as she exchanged glances with a colleague. Harrington, unwilling to concede defeat so easily, quickly erased the board. "Let's try something more challenging," he said, the edge in his voice more pronounced. "Something from my current research." He typed a new equation, one Jack didn't immediately recognize. This wasn't standard curriculum. It was cutting-edge theoretical mathematics, the kind published in specialized journals. "This problem has implications for quantum computing encryption," Harrington explained to the room, though his eyes remained fixed on Jack. "If you prefer to return to your seat, I would certainly understand." The challenge hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown. The room held its collective breath, waiting for Jack's retreat. Instead, he picked up the marker again. Jack examined the new equation, his initial confidence wavering. This was different, complex, abstract, with notation he'd never encountered during his military career. For a moment, doubt crept in. Maybe he had overstepped. Maybe Harrington was right about his place. The silence in the room grew heavier as seconds ticked by. Participants leaned forward in anticipation, some with pity in their eyes, others with barely disguised amusement. "As I suspected," Harrington said, reaching for the marker. "Perhaps we should continue with the competition." "Wait," Jack said quietly, pulling the marker back. Something had clicked, a pattern within the chaos of symbols. He remembered advanced encryption protocols he'd worked with during his final years before retirement. The mathematics behind quantum computing wasn't entirely foreign to him. He'd studied it privately, fascinated by its implications for the security systems he once helped design. He began to write, slowly at first, then with growing confidence. The tension in the room shifted as participants exchanged confused glances. Even Harrington's smug expression faltered as he watched Jack work through the problem with unexpected skill. Dr. Chin sat forward, her eyes widening as she watched Jack's approach. It wasn't just that Jack was solving the problem. He was taking an unconventional route, one that showed remarkable intuition. Halfway through the solution, Jack paused, frowning at his work. There was a barrier. The equation seemed to lead to a dead end. Harrington's mouth curled into a satisfied smile. "A valiant attempt," he said, reaching again for the marker. Jack didn't relinquish it. Instead, he stared at the board, his mind racing. The room faded away as he focused entirely on the problem before him. Then, like a key turning in a lock, he saw the pathway forward, an elegant transformation that would simplify the entire equation. He began writing again, more confidently now. The tapping of marker against board was the only sound in the hushed hall. When he applied his transformation, audible gasps came from the front row, where the professional mathematician sat. Dr. Chin whispered something to her colleague, who nodded vigorously. Harrington's face had lost all color. He was no longer watching Jack's solution with disdain, but with growing alarm. What the elderly veteran was doing shouldn't have been possible, especially not from someone without formal advanced training. "That's not the standard approach," he said sharply. Jack didn't respond. He couldn't. He was too deeply immersed in the mathematics, in a state of flow he'd experienced during critical missions when deciphering coded enemy communications. He wasn't just solving Harrington's problem. He was improving upon it, finding efficiencies the researcher hadn't seen. As he neared completion, tensions had shifted dramatically. The participants who had laughed earlier were now silent, their expressions a mixture of confusion and respect. The mathematicians in the front row were whispering urgently among themselves. Harrington himself seemed caught between contradictory impulses, a desire to maintain his authority and professional fascination with the mathematical insight unfolding before him. Jack had nearly reached the solution when Harrington suddenly moved to the board, examining his work closely. His finger traced one particular transformation Jack had used. "The simplification," he said, his voice tight with contained emotion. "Where did you learn it?" Jack finally looked at him directly. "I didn't learn it. I just saw it." Their eyes met in a moment of silent confrontation. The prestigious mathematician and the elderly veteran standing before an equation that was bridging their worlds in ways neither had anticipated. Before Harrington could respond, Dr. Chin stood up from her seat. "That's the Lu Takahashi method," she said, her voice carrying across the hall. "Except it was only published in the International Journal of Quantum Mathematics last month." She fixed Jack with an intense stare. "How could you possibly know about it?" The question hung in the air as every eye in the room turned to Jack. Jack stared at the marker in his hand, suddenly aware of the crossroads before him. For years, he had hidden his ability, convinced that no one would believe an elderly veteran working at a library could understand advanced mathematics. He'd been comfortable in the shadows, learning quietly, keeping his passion private. But now, exposed in the spotlight, he had to choose: retreat into the safety of anonymity or stand in his truth. "I didn't know it was called the Lu Takahashi method," he said, his voice stronger now. "These approaches were similar to what we developed for secure communications during my service." "Your service?" Dr. Chin asked. Jack straightened his posture, military baron returning fully. "I was Air Force Special Reconnaissance, cryptographic analysis and development for 28 years. "Impossible," Harrington scoffed, though his voice lacked conviction. "These concepts require years of specialized mathematical training," which he clearly has, Dr. Chin said, approaching the board and examining Jack's work more closely. "Yet here it is, perfectly executed." She turned to Jack. "But why aren't you?" "Because life happens," Jack interrupted, a hint of steel entering his voice. "When I retired at 55, I thought I'd work in defense contracting or private security. But my wife got sick, Alzheimer's. I became her caretaker." He gestured to the partially completed solution on the board. Academia was an option. The room fell silent as the reality of his circumstances settled over the audience. "After she passed, I was 65, too old to start a new career in mathematics. Who would hire me?" Jack's voice carried no self-pity, just a matter-of-fact tone of a man who had accepted his circumstances. "The library job pays the bills. The math," his hand moved toward the board, "that's just for me." Dr. Chin studied him with newfound respect. Your mathematical intuition is extraordinary. The practical applications in your military work must have been significant. Jack nodded slightly. Some of it's still classified. Let's just say my team's work on encryption algorithms saved lives. Harrington cleared his throat, professional curiosity finally overtaking his pride. What kind of mathematics do you explore these days, Mr. Thompson? Different things, Jack replied, suddenly self-conscious again. Number theory mostly, some work on prime factorization algorithms. Dr. Chun and Harrington exchanged startled glances. Prime factorization was at the heart of cryptography research, one of the most sophisticated areas of applied mathematics. I'd like to see your work, Dr. Chun said firmly. The chalk felt heavy in his hand as Jack turned back to the board. The unfinished equation waited, along with a decision that would change the trajectory of his life. He could stop now, return to his seat, go back to his predictable existence. Or he could finish what he started and fully reveal the mind he'd hidden for so long. Jack lifted the marker and turned to face the problem once more. His hand no longer trembled. I'm going to finish this, he said, more to himself into the room full of mathematicians. 6 months later, Jack Thompson stood in a different room, this one at MIT's mathematics department, explaining his approach to quantum encryption to a group of graduate students and faculty. No longer hesitant or apologetic about claiming space, his life had transformed with breathtaking speed. After that competition, Dr. Chun had arranged a special consulting position, recognizing that talent like Jack's couldn't be bound by conventional academic requirements. 2 of his theoretical approaches had already been published, with his name listed as the primary author. Dr. Harrington had come around too, though it had taken time. Now he grudgingly acknowledged Jack's insights, especially after his work on quantum encryption had attracted attention from research institutions across the country. The biggest change, though, was internal. Jack no longer hid his intelligence or passion. He spoke with authority about his work, knowing his value didn't derive from age or credentials, but from the power of his mind. The military precision and discipline that had shaped his earlier life now served him well in his new role, bringing structure and rigor to theoretical explorations. His story had gone viral after a participant posted about it online. It sparked a national conversation about overlooked talent among veterans and elderly citizens. Several universities had since created special pathways for non-traditional experts like Jack, people whose practical experience and self-study had led to profound insights outside traditional academic channels. As Jack finished his explanation, a student raised her hand. A young woman with uncertainty in her eyes but determination in her question. Jack called on her immediately, remembering what it felt like to be unseen. Never be afraid to raise your hand, he told his students. The question you're afraid to ask might change everything, not just for you, but for everyone in the room. He smiled, remembering his own journey from invisible to extraordinary. Brilliant minds exist at every age, often where you least expect them. If Jack's journey from overlooked to extraordinary touched your heart, remember that genius exists in unexpected places, often hidden by circumstances, not lack of ability. Who might you be underestimating in your own life? We'd love to hear your stories of hidden talents discovered. Please comment with respect, share, and subscribe for more glimpses of extraordinary moments that change lives forever.